Hello, hello. Today we are going to do something very fun, and that is we are going to conduct a sort of experiment, and I'm going to take you along with me on this. So the idea here is this is something that I've totally never done before. So I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm just giving it a go. And I feel like it would be fun for me and hopefully you as well to just kind of see how this all works out. I don't know if it's going to work out. It might not work out at all. But I'm okay with that because the point isn't really like I have to have such and such a result. The point is just to explore a new way of working and see if I find something interesting in it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to do our own version of a method that the author William S. Burroughs used called the cut-up technique. So essentially what this is he would take different pieces of writing, maybe a newspaper, a Shakespeare sonnet, and some other things, and cut them up, literally have these printed pages, cut the words and sentences out, and then sort of randomly rearrange them to spark ideas and to add a little bit of that random sense that is very essential to surrealistic thought. So I wouldn't call William S. Burroughs any kind of formal surrealist, and I'm certain that he wouldn't have called himself that either. However, there is a surrealistic element to this, and he was actually inspired to do this by Brion Gysin, I think that's how you say his name, who was a surrealistic artist. And he actually was even linked to the very, very, very early days of the surrealist movement with Andre Breton and some of those other figures if you happen to know about them. So we're just going to take this idea and have some fun with it and see if I can build an image out of this cut up process. Now, I am going to experiment with different ways of doing this. Eventually, maybe we'll get some actual photographs possibly and use the cut up technique on those. But for today, I am going to be using text. So I have typed out a few quotes from 3 different texts because I don't actually want to cut up my books. And I'm going to just go ahead and start cutting these out. So I'm using Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. I'm using Jack Kerouac's Big Sur. And I'm using Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. So I think this will be an interesting combination. These are just books that I've read that are often in my mind. And I'm very excited to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and start cutting these up. I have finished cutting up my chosen quotes. I actually did one quote from each of the books that I told you about before, and I cut them up and I just put them in this little basket so that I can kind of shift them around together, and then I'm going to just randomly pull them out and start kind of arranging them how I think I might want them. There's going to be some of my thought that's going to go into this. I'm not going to let it just be completely random. So it's kind of somewhere between random and controlled in that regard, which to me is definitely the way to do this. I think you can do it totally random, but it might be a little harder to coax some kind of meaning out of it that way. Maybe I'm wrong. So this is, again, just an experiment. We're going to see how this works out, but that's what I'm going to do. And then once I've kind of arranged them here on my piece of paper, I've just got a piece of construction paper here that I'm going to tape them on. So once I have them arranged the way that I want, I'm just going to tape them to my construction paper, and we will see if we can get some kind of inspiration for an image from that. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I am finished now with my cut up, and I do want to make one note. I said that I wasn't going to do it totally random, but I ended up changing my mind on that. So I basically wound up putting all of the papers in a little bag, really mixing them around, and then just taking them out one by one and lining them up in the exact order that they came out of the bag. This is because one thing that I obviously am having a little trouble with is letting go of some of the control, which is a part of what this whole exercise is about. And as I found, when I started to think too hard about it and try to move the pieces around and make them fit in a way that I felt was more interesting or suitable or something like that, it didn't really work. So I dropped that and I decided to do it completely randomly. And while that does make for a lot of just kind of gibberish, it also makes for something surprisingly interesting. And this is because if you are a person who has an analytical mind, you can find connections between these weird sort of non sequiturs if you're really looking for them. So it's just like reading a poem. When you read a poem, sometimes the meaning of the poem is not just apparent. So you have to actually spend some time sitting and thinking about the connections between the different images that are being brought up and just the vocabulary and things like that in order to sort of coax out the meaning of the poem, right? So it's a similar kind of a tactic here. And I actually was very lucky in that I had one line on mine in particular that I think is really interesting. So I'm just going to show you my little cut up here. And as you can see, all I did was I just scotch taped it to this paper and I put them completely the exact order that they came out of the bag that I was drawing them from. So I just laid them out in order and taped them down until I got down to the bottom. And as you can see, it got a little messy, but that's kind of fun. That's a part of it, right? So it has like a weird sort of chaotic randomness to it overall. And the whole thing is interesting in a way, but there is one particular part that I'll read to you that I am going to use as my inspiration for my image. So that is, modern man, however, undisturbed by witches, is already stone itself. So I personally think that that is a sort of bizarrely brilliant little line there, and that's kind of the fun part about this, is that it's just completely random and yet I find that there is meaning in it. And so I'm going to use that as the basis for my image. The cut up thing is actually really fun and I definitely enjoyed doing this, and I even got my husband to join me and he made one too, and we just kind of sat around and pasted these together and then we had fun reading them to each other. So it's just a fun little exercise to do, and it definitely can produce some interesting ideas. So we're going to take this and I'm going to start conceptualizing my image, and then I will give you guys a look at what I'm planning to do and how I'm going to move forward with constructing this image. I have come up with the finalized idea for the image that I'm going to make. So let me just explain that to you. Basically, I'm going to take a fairly close crop shot of myself, something like this framing here. I'm just going to be looking directly at the camera, and I'm going to use myself as a subject. I'm going to split myself apart in Photoshop and then have a stone heart that is surrounded by an MC Escher style knot sort of floating in between the two halves. So that's the basic idea. It's actually pretty simple and straightforward, and I've done something somewhat similar to this before, so I don't think it'll be all that difficult. Now I have everything set up to take my first shot, which is going to be just the image of me looking directly at the camera, and I have my settings already set on my camera. So I'm using f8 1/40th of a second and ISO 800. I am just using a single lighting source. It's my Godox 160 watt light, which I use all the time, and I have a 36-inch octabox on that For this image, just that single lighting source is going to be totally fine. I don't want anything complex here. I just kind of want a simple, elegant lighting. And so we're ready to go for this first shot. I have my trigger already set up on my camera. So let's just go ahead and do this. And I am gonna drop the straps. I have some tape on the floor here. That's why I'm looking down to show me where my mark is. So I always do that whenever I'm taking self-portraits so that I know where my focus is going to be. And I'm just going to drop the straps of my shirt a little bit. Hopefully not totally mess up the mic while I'm doing this. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a few like this. Okay, so that should be really all I need for that. It's not anything complicated, and since I know exactly what I'm looking for, it makes it a lot easier. So I'm just checking the back of my camera to see how those look, and sometimes I'll just check the focus to make sure that the camera is hitting the correct focal point, which I always set the focus on my eyes. And I think that everything is looking pretty good on these, and I definitely got some that are totally usable. So we can move on to shooting the actual objects. And with that, we are going to cut away from the shoot. So I did proceed to photograph the rock and also the MC Escher style knot that I fashioned, but I didn't use either one of those objects in my final composition. And that's why I decided to not force you to sit through my whole shoot, since I didn't even wind up using that part of it. Basically, all I was doing was just shooting those objects under the same lighting as what I had set up for the subject of the image. But what I wound up doing instead was creating in Photoshop an MC Escher style knot, and then using a paintbrush to just paint these sort of connecting ribbons between the two halves of me as they split apart. And I also took an image that I took in Death Valley and built up an entire background for this from it. So it's basically just this one photograph that I took, but I expanded the sky and painted some clouds in there just to make a larger frame for the image. And then I also added a little bit of a texture to it, and that was pretty much it. So am I in love with this image? I really don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about it right now. I mean, I do think there's something interesting there, but the idea wasn't necessarily to make something brilliant. It was just to play around and experiment with this cut up method, and I definitely had fun doing that. And for me, part of the reason I wanted to make this series was to show you how the process is also about failure. It's not always about coming out with something brilliant every time, because the fact is that that doesn't happen every time, and it doesn't happen every time for anyone. So if anyone out there is trying to fool you into thinking otherwise, it's definitely not true. This is a part of the artistic process, and I think it's one of the best parts of it, is just playing around and being okay with the possibility of it totally not working out in the end. So I hope you enjoyed doing this with me. I am definitely going to make more episodes because I am intrigued by this method and I want to try it out using actual photographs. So I don't know if we'll be able to do that next time, but we'll see, maybe we can. If you are not subscribed to my channel yet, go ahead and do that so that you won't miss out on the next episode, and I will see you next time.